say, first of all, thank you all very much for having me. Thank you, Francois, for inviting me. I will say that I'm really pleased to talk to so many fellas this evening because, you know, it's International Women's, it's Women's Month, and International Women's Day was last week. So I have only talked to women, given presentations to women over the last 2 weeks. So I'm glad to broaden my audience a little bit and talk to some fellas. So let me share my screen, and then I will get into my presentation. Okay, can everybody see that 3 steps to your dream career? Okay, great. So that is the title of my presentation, 3 steps to your dream career. Before I get into those 3 steps, I do just want to tell you a little bit more about me. So I'm married. I have 2 kids. I've been married for 15 years. I have a son, Seth, that's 13, and my daughter, Sophia, is 11. That's us in a breakout room. I don't know if you all have tried those, but since the pandemic, we have just been obsessed with breakout rooms because you can get a private room and you can, you know, solve puzzles and have family time together in a safe environment. So we've done, I don't know, probably about 6 or 7 of those, and we're actually going to do one on Saturday. I have spent 25 years in metals and mining. So I basically have been in a hard hat and steel-toed boots pretty much my entire career. And I'll talk to you more about my actual career progression. I've had the opportunity to work and live all over the world. So those black circles are all places where I have worked. Right now, I split my time between the north of France and the US. I'm actually based in the north of France, but because of COVID, I came back and I'm actually in Knoxville, Tennessee. So I lived in Knoxville, Tennessee for about 15 years and kept my home here and was commuting back and forth. And since COVID, basically, I've been here telecommuting. So this is really late for me, just so you know. I mean, it's not a problem, but I actually work the European schedule, even though I'm in the US. I have one kind of strange circle there in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, and that is just because I travel before COVID. I was traveling back and forth between Tennessee and France every 2 weeks. So I sort of felt like I was living in, in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. The company that I work for, we make stainless steel, specialty alloys, and electrical steels. I can't tell you all of the products that we work on, but I hint at some of the markets that we address with just these stock photos. So here's an image of a television screen. Here's an image of a building that has stainless steel. Here's an image of outer space, automotive, and aerospace. So this gives you just a feel for the types of things that my team works on. So I have about 150 scientists and engineers located in 3 places. So 2 in France. I have 2 research centers in France. I'm located at the biggest one. And then I have a research center in Brazil as well. And so I cover all of those areas with my team. And then we focus on new products. And we also focus on the actual process of making the materials to reduce the carbon footprint and emissions. As Francois said, I went to Penn State, so I got my PhD from Penn State. I'm a chemical engineer, and then went back to school a little bit later on and got my executive MBA. I spent 20 years with a company called Alcoa. They're an aluminum company, and then two and a half years ago moved to Operum. And then the other thing that is important for me, and so I want to share with you, is I'm very active in my community. So these are a couple of the nonprofits that I either sit on the board of or I do pro bono strategy consulting for them. They focus on children typically. So the Muse is a children's museum. Girls Inc., you may have heard of, is a after-school program for girls. And then I also am a mentor in our entrepreneurship center here in Knoxville. So I leverage everything I've learned about strategy and innovation and help new entrepreneurs launch their businesses. And I'm going onto the board of that starting in July. So that's a little bit about me. So I want to talk about career progression. And the first thing I want to tell you is that organizations are not great at helping you with this. And so I don't know if you're feeling frustrated that you don't really know how to take your next career move, but a global survey has shown that 53% of employees that were surveyed, of about 8,000, say, look, my company isn't helping me do this. So I just want to tell you that if you're sort of like, I don't know how to navigate this, you are absolutely not alone. Organizations really don't do a good job at this, particularly if you want to have anything remotely like a non-traditional career path. So if you want to, in most organizations, if you want to, start as a technical person, then become a manager and a bigger manager and a bigger manager, that they can typically help you with. But if you want to do anything else, particularly for people like us, if we want to stay technical, it can be really difficult to know, okay, well, how do I get promoted? How do I progress, etc. And so this is just a known problem. And so what I'm hopefully going to be able to do is to give you some strategies so that you can figure this out on your own and take the lead for yourself. So there's 3 steps, and I'll go over each of these steps in detail. The first step is discover. So you have to do some work to understand what are the possibilities and how do they match with what you are actually interested in as a person. There's some analysis that you need to do in terms of how well does the requirements for that job I'm interested in fit with the skill sets that I have today. And then you have some execution to do. If there's some gaps that need to be closed, then you need to put together a plan in order to do that. So those are the 3 steps that I'm going to talk with you about. And the good thing about the 3 steps is they're completely agnostic to the job, meaning whether you want to stay technical, whether you want to become a manager or a project manager, whether or not you want to be an entrepreneur, whatever you want to do in your career, if you use this 3-step methodology, it's going to help you progress and move forward with what you're wanting to do. So before I get into the 3 steps, as I said, I'll tell you a little bit more about my own personal career progression. So I started out, my first job was an intern at Texaco, which I don't even think exists anymore. I think it's Chevron now, but I was a reservoir engineer when I was at Penn State. And then I moved to Alcoa as a technician / engineer. So I was in their research center, and I had my bachelor's degree at the time. So I was doing experiments for the scientists. And then I was very fortunate. Alcoa sent me back to get my PhD. So I went back to Penn State, did that. And then when I came back, I was the engineer that was sort of designing the experiments and giving those designs to the technicians to do for me. I also, at that point, went into operations. And so that's actually how I ended up in Tennessee. There was a big aluminum manufacturing facility here in Knoxville. And so I spent 3 or 4 years actually in the plant working in operations. And then at that point was when I raised my hand and said, I'm kind of interested in management. I'd like to try that. So I became a manager, kind of a working manager, meaning I still had a lot of my own technical projects to do where I was the subject matter expert, but I had 3 people that worked with me and a $500,000 budget. And then I grew that. So it turns out that I really love being a leader and being a manager. So many people, particularly, technical folks like us, some people really love management, some people hate it. So that first sort of, particularly if you can try it out with a smaller team, it's a good opportunity to decide what you like. And it's interesting. My husband and I met in graduate school, so we have the same degrees and everything, and he doesn't like management at all. He really prefers to stay technical, work in the lab, work on his projects, and not deal with people and their problems. So I'm the opposite. So then I just kept getting bigger managerial roles, and I became a director. and then had 20 people and a $5 million budget. And then at that time, I decided to go back to school. So this was in 2016, decided to go back to school to get my executive MBA. And then as soon as I got that leverage, that gave me the springboard to take a much larger role, which is where I am now as Chief Innovation Officer. So I have 150 people and a $25 million budget. And I don't know what's next, to be perfectly honest. I just wrote my first book. That is opening up some pretty interesting opportunities for me. So I think that right now I'm side hustling with all of that, and we'll see where that goes. So there's still some blank spaces in my career progression. So I want to tell you about kind of how I did that, how I was able to take these steps and grow my own career, because I can tell you that, I was one of the 50% that really didn't have a lot of support from my organization. So it was really up to me to figure out, okay, what do I like to do? What am I good at? And how do I position myself? To be somewhat skeptical to say, okay, well, just because it worked for her doesn't mean it's going to work for me. So I did, I have been really interested throughout my career, and especially recently with, women that I've had a chance to work with around the world and the struggles that we have had in our careers. So I launched a global research project back in 2018 to really understand what their needs are and what some of the barriers are for us. And through that project, I learned a lot about, these barriers to career progression, but also what successful women have, are doing. So a lot of what I'm going to tell you is not only coming from me, but it's coming from my research, from interviewing a lot of women for my book, but also, interviewing people in HR and other places to really learn about what are the best practices in career progression. So step one is the discovery part. So you have to really discover what the opportunities are. And the key tool for doing that is informational interviews. There can be a really big gap between what it looks like this job is and what it actually is. And so the way to really get at what's really going on is to talk to people who are doing it. So I'm going to link out, I actually just a couple of weeks ago wrote a blog post on this. So I'm just going to link out to my blog post to talk in a little more detail. But so really it's just finding people who have a job that you think is similar to what you might be interested in and talking to them. It sounds really easy, but a lot of people do not do it. So I want to just talk to you about what some of those barriers are and give you the tools to overcome them. So the first one is people can sometimes be afraid to ask. So for example, if you say, oh, I want to be Chief Innovation Officer, so I'm one of those, you can come and ask me and I will tell you what it's really like, what my day-to-day job is like, what skills I use the most, etc. But maybe you wouldn't feel comfortable doing that. So I think that you have to get over that. You have to put yourself in a learning mindset and say, I need to know this if this is really going to be my career progression or not. So you've got to ask. And the way to ask is simply to just send a quick note to say, hey, I'm interested in, your job looks interesting. I'm interested in learning more about it. Can I have 30 minutes or an hour of your time? And here are a couple of questions that I have in mind. I have done that myself and I've never been refused. And people have done that with me and I have never refused anybody. And the key really to that is, first of all, just being very succinct and polite, but also including a couple of questions in your email. And the reason that is because, if you were to ask me, I might be sort of like, well, I wonder what they want. I don't know how to answer them. Just so to alleviate, the person that you're trying to ask, to alleviate any of their concerns, if you're prepared with a couple of questions in advance and say, this is what I'm interested in, I think that you will have an extremely high rate of success if you try to do that. So, and this blog post actually has scripts that you can follow. So that's the first thing. The second thing is maybe there's a role that you're interested in, but you don't personally know anybody who is doing it. So then you can ask for a referral. And that again is very simply, if you know somebody who knows somebody, just send them a note saying, I'd like to do an informational interview. And then the key to getting people to refer you is to make it super easy for them. And that is to actually write the email for them and say, here, if you want to just pass this along to that person, that would be great. And so you ask for the referral and then you write that email for them. All they have to do is send it. And again, that really increases your probability of success of getting that referral. So the third thing that kind of can keep people from actually doing this is not really knowing what to ask. And this is really, really important because you need to ask about not only, okay, what are the skills and competencies that are needed for that job? So like, what might I need to be able to bring to the job? You also need to understand like what the day-to-day life is like, because you might not like it. I mean, it turns out you may find that you don't actually really want to have the kind of life that is, for example, like mine, where I travel 60% of my time. I'm always in the wrong time zone, and I mostly talk with customers and external stakeholders, and I've not done anything technical for years. You may not want to have anything to do with that when you find out what it's really like. So it's important to not only understand, okay, you need strong communication skills, you need strong business acumen, but also, this is what my day-to-day life is like, and is that interesting to you or not? It may or may not be. And then the other thing is, so if you go around and start doing a bunch of informational interviews, I mean, you might be concerned about what your manager will think about that. And my recommendation is just to be upfront with them and just say, I'm taking a proactive approach to my career. I've seen this person and that person, and I'm kind of interested in learning about what they are doing. So I'm planning to do informational interviews. If you have a good manager, that person's going to say, wow, that's a great idea. Let me know if I can help you or make any introductions for you. That's a good manager. A neutral manager is just going to be like, oh, okay. A bad manager is going to tell you no. And that should raise flags for you, because you probably already have other issues with that manager. I think you should just put it in the back of your mind to say, okay, is this manager possibly holding me back in other ways? And I think it's a separate conversation about how to handle that. I have certainly had managers who've tried to hold me back, and that's a separate conversation. But what I just encourage you is to just be upfront with them, because what you don't want to have happen, if these other managers or whatever are talking at the water cooler or whatever it's going to end up being when we get back to work, to find out, that you were sort of fishing around for a job without them knowing about it, that could raise some red flags. But if you're upfront with them and saying, I'm proactively just interested in learning more about these things and I plan to talk to them, I would expect it to actually be seen favorably as you being proactive in your own development. Okay? And then we just talk a little bit about how to actually conduct this interview. So, I mean, it's just, I think you should see it as a slightly more formal, just sort of chat. So you come prepared with your questions, you make sure that you're mindful of the time that you've allotted with this person. So, I mean, I think that's pretty normal. The one thing that you may not have thought of is that all good leaders are always interviewing for talent, which means that if you were to come to me and say, okay, Angelique, I'm interested in learning about your job. Okay, great. And you have your questions. Okay, great. You've already piqued my interest. So now I'm going to do a little bit of interviewing you to see if I can't steal you from wherever you currently are, because you've already impressed me with your preparation and your proactivity. So even if you're not interested in that, even if it turns out you're not exactly interested in that role, it is never a bad idea to impress leaders. So make sure that you are prepared with just a quick, this is what your current role is, this is what you're interested in, and then kind of a possible trick question that you should just be prepared to answer is like, when do you think you're going to be ready for your next move? I'm constantly, poaching for talent. So say, okay, because in my mind, I could be thinking, all right, this could be a fit for a gap that I have. When are you going to be ready? So you just need to be able to answer that question. My recommendation is if you can be a little vague about it. And I think if you haven't already talked with your own boss about you making a move in a certain time frame, then I think it's good to just say, oh, I'm just looking, maybe the next, couple of years or something like that. And the reason I say that is because, again, what you don't want to do is have your boss, at lunch find out that, you told somebody that you're going to go work for them in 6 months. You know what I mean? You don't want to surprise people. But be prepared that even though you're proactively reaching out and you have a list of questions for them, they're going to probably have some questions for you. So if you're prepared, again, you're going to really do very well. You're going to get the answers you want, but you're going to impress people along the way and expand your professional network. And then the last thing I would say is just say, after you've done the interview, make sure you send a quick thank you email. And I always like to end with this line of, okay, can you think of anybody else I should speak with? Because that's how you end up with this huge professional network of potential opportunities, is by talking to people and then asking them for ideas about other people you can talk to. So that's not only where you understand potential job, like types of roles that you might be interested in, but that's also how you uncover the hidden job market. All of these managers who have roles coming up in their mind that they haven't published yet, and they'll just say, oh, okay, this might be a person for that. And then they can be proactively coming to you and saying, hey, I'm about to post something. Just wanted to let you know that this is available to you. So that is how you uncover what roles that could be of interest to you and expand your professional network and impress leadership, kind of all in one shot with these informational interviews. If you can just overcome the initial barrier of, okay, maybe you may be a little bit nervous to do this in the beginning, but once you get started, then it will just become a standard part of your sort of professional development. Okay. Yes?
Are you taking questions now? It looks like Dwayne has a question.
Sure, I can take a question.
Go ahead, Dwayne.
Hi, Dr. Adams. This is Dwayne Allen. Thank you so much for your participating here. And that's all goodness for what you did. I think another key piece is when you're trying to go and being proactive about finding about your career, is try to get some G2 or some intelligence of what your managers in other conversations when they talk about you. Are you in a positive light with the rest of his colleagues or throughout the organization as well? Because that conversation that you'll have with that leader that you might, for a job that you might see yourself in, it may have an impression on you, and you might need to go and work that in the conversation, because this might be your first time talking with them and things like that.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And yeah, I think you can try to, if you're able to find that information, you can certainly use it. I also think that when you have those initial conversations with someone, as I said, you're already being proactive, you're already being prepared, you're completely on point. That is enough for me to be like, oh, what I heard about you wasn't right.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? So
But it's
that's why
always
it's
good to
really,
have that
yeah,
conversation piece
yeah,
when that comes to. So this is good stuff.
yeah. Good point. Good point. Okay. So step 2 is so now if you have, you know, if you've figured out some roles you might be interested in, now you got to turn those into, you know, actual jobs. And whether they be inside your firm or outside of your firm, this is where you need to really start to understand how, you know, how well do I fit what I want to do. So in this case, you're going to need some job descriptions and a quick analysis that I call the role fit index, but it's just counting. It's just going to be some math. What you can do is get on something like LinkedIn or Indeed or something like that and pull some job descriptions for these roles that you think you might be interested in. So it doesn't even have to be the exact job, but the exact place you're interested in, because right now you're just trying to gather intelligence about, okay, you know, am I close to already having what I need, or am I far to already having what I need? So where the job description comes from is not necessarily important. Although, of course, if there is an open job that you're interested in, you know, at a place you're interested in, then you can grab that one. But what you want to do is get the job description. They all have a list of qualifications. And really what you want to do is just look at all of those qualifications and see if you have them or not. There's a couple of qualifications that are you know, that tend to say, you know, requirements, okay? And then there's usually a really long list, and often redundant list of stuff that I honestly don't know why they're in the job descriptions. I mean, I can tell you, I mean, some of you may know, as a hiring manager, it can be really hard to know exactly what you're looking for. So you end up just padding your job description with this long list of stuff. But you can take a very objective and quantitative assessment of where you are in that job, where you are with the qualifications, simply by counting up the number of qualifications that you have and saying, okay, if I have roughly 60% of these qualifications, I would apply for the job personally. And if you have, I would say, less than 40% or less, I probably wouldn't bother. And if you're somewhere in the middle, I would say, okay, maybe give it a shot, and you kind of see what kind of feedback you get if you were to actually apply for the position. But the important thing is to actually do the analysis, because it can be really hard just to look at this laundry list of things and think, okay, am I there or not? The other thing I would say is that there is data that shows that women in particular disqualify themselves early. So they tend to disqualify themselves if they don't have 90%. Whereas, you know, men tend to just, you know, say, oh, you know, I can do it. So I think a better way is to really kind of give yourself this buffer about where you are with the qualifications. So the role fit index is simply that mathematical calculation. The other thing about job descriptions is sometimes your experience can actually cover multiple aspects of a job description. So I would go ahead and count it multiple times. So for example, if the job description says, you know, shows independence on a project, and then they also wanted to see that you have maybe managed multiple stakeholders or something like that, and you have one project in which you can show that you demonstrated both of those things, then as far as I'm concerned, both of those qualifications have been met. So so that's really the second step, is to actually go, once you've kind of figured out the role that you want, actually go grab job descriptions out there off the internet, and, you know, look at the qualifications and say, okay, yes, 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 no, no, no. And then once you've done that, you can see, okay, I'm a pretty good fit, in which case I would just start applying, or not really a good fit, in which case you have some decisions to make. And the decision is either to say, I'm going to close the gap some kind of way, or to say, maybe this type of role isn't a fit for me now, maybe it is later. And I don't really want to put in the effort to close the gap. So that's just a decision you have to make, but do it with clear data. I would say you need to analyze at least 4 or 5 job descriptions in the types of roles that you're interested in before you really have enough information to know which way you want to go, in terms of I'm ready or I'm not quite ready. And so the third step is, if you are not ready, quite ready, if you decide that you want to still go for it, then you have to put a development plan in place. You have to identify those skills that are missing and find a way to close the gap. And there's really 2 ways that you can do that. You can do kind of on the job or learn by doing training, or you can take courses. I would say that the best way, if possible, is to do learn by doing inside your current organization, meaning to raise your hand and say, hey, I'm really interested in becoming a project manager. So is there a small project that I could take the lead on? Or is there a big project that I could take carve out a slice of, so that I can get the skills I need in project management? If you do that in your current organization, then it will be 100% transferable in their minds, meaning, you demonstrated the skills, the exact way your organization understands those skills, and so boom, you check all the boxes. The second way is to do learn by doing, but elsewhere. So for example, learn by doing in your community service type of activities, or learn by doing, in your side hustle if you have one. So be able to actually do it, demonstrate the skills, but then there's a translation that has to happen, and so you'll have to be able to tell your organization or put it on your resume if you're going to a different organization in a way that makes sense to the hiring manager. So there's certainly ways to do that. Typically, if you kind of boil things down to their basic metrics, it's possible. So if you worked on a project and you had a certain number of people you had to manage, number of people is a universal metric. A budget is a universal metric. That you did it on time is a universal metric. So if you can boil that work down to those universal metrics out, when it's done outside of your organization, then you can transfer it. And then the last way is through education, is to take courses. And so for me, the courses are good, but not necessarily directly transferable. And it really depends on what those courses are, and also kind of how your organization views it. So some organizations are sort of like, okay, you've got an MBA, that's all we needed, and now you're going to become a senior leader. Others say, oh, MBA, you're just a bookworm, we don't care about that. So you do have to understand what your organization values, because it's different. But if they value education, then that can certainly be a way to close the gap also. So again, the third step is, if you like the role and you're not quite ready, but you want to go after it anyway, then you've got to put a development plan in place. This is another area where I do think, organizations are not great at defining development plans for people, but if you've defined the development plan yourself and said, hey, I really feel like I need to develop this skill, oftentimes your organization can help you with that. They may have training that they often send people to, or they may have, a special project that, that's somewhere in the pipeline that again is hidden that they can put you on and help you develop, help you close those gaps. So I do think this is a place to reach out to your manager and say, okay, I'd like help with this specific thing. They're good with helping with some specific things, but not sort of an overall, hey, I want to be chief information officer, down the road. What do I need to do to get there? It's a little typically too abstract for the way most organizations work. The one thing I do want to mention is whatever you have in your development plan, it needs to have a communication component in it, particularly for us who are technical people. The most underrated skill in a technical career is being able to talk all the technical stuff in a simplified way such that people who aren't experts can understand it. And I would say that is the biggest thing that has helped me in my career. I mean, even today, I am in meetings where I get put on projects that are not necessarily my, my area, because I'm the only one that can explain it to the chairman of the board in a way that, that he could understand it. So I don't know, if some other time you wanted me to come back, I could teach you about the framework that I've developed myself over many years in order to do this. There are some books out there that I could recommend also, but I would just say that no matter where you are in your career, unless you plan to only work with your direct peers who you understand your lingo, if you want to get outside of that at all, you need to work on your communication skills. And I don't even need to know any of you to know that there's room for improvement in that, because that's just the sort of the way we were taught in school to communicate. It does not serve us well when we want to communicate across different stakeholders. So I just put that pitch in there for your development plan. Okay, so I mean, just to summarize, I guess I didn't mention in the outset, but resumes and interviews are important. They're outside of the scope of what I talk about. I'm not an expert in those things, but I do have some resources that I can recommend about resumes and interviews. But getting back to the 3 steps I did cover. So the first one is to discover. So you've got to do your informational interviews. I linked to my blog post where I've got scripts to help you overcome any of the barriers. The second is you need to analyze job descriptions. A really good resource for sort of identifying different places and different jobs that could be of interest to you is a book called The 2-Hour Job Search. It talks about how you can use LinkedIn to find all these different opportunities, and then your own personal network to really kind of get warm leads. And then the third is to execute, so your development plan. And so here's just a podcast, actually. Manager Tools is a free podcast that's got some great tools about how to put a development plan together for yourself. And then they also have a great podcast on resumes called Your Resume Stinks. So it tells you really how to make a very crisp resume that's focused on metrics. And I will say that is the way that I have used to get my most recent job. I made my resume exactly the way that they said to. So that is all I had. Any more questions for me?
I have a question for you. What is the biggest challenge when becoming a first-time manager?
Excellent question. So the biggest challenge is delegation. So you're going from being an individual contributor, you are solely responsible for your own work output. And typically people who are interested in going into management, are usually high achievers. So you're used to, putting out really great work product. And now you have some people and you have to get them to put out really great work product. And it's very different than doing it yourself. So understanding, okay, how do I motivate that person? How do I assign the work? One, in a way that they understand it, but two, in a way that I'm not trying to get them to do it exactly like I do. And then three, learning, okay, is this good enough? It was not exactly the way I would do it, but is it sufficient? So kind of learning all of those things, I think is really the biggest challenge for first-time managers. It's a complete skill set that really doesn't get taught very well, in my opinion. But once you have learned that, then you can get so much more work done because you can work through others, and you can build the respect and trust of your team because people really like it when you trust them to do important work. So if you can get that right, it really opens up yourself as a leader.
Thank you.
See something.
Any other questions from anybody? I do see you can type it in the chat or you come off mute, whatever's easier. Sherman asks, what were the most significant skills learned by completing your MBA?
Good question. So I would say the personal skill, so two, there's like a personal thing about myself and my own leadership. And then there's a framework, a strategy framework or something. So for myself, because a lot of the MBA program I happen to be in, they talk a lot about leadership development. And one of the core things was about being okay with telling your story, like whatever your leadership journey is, any trials and tribulations that you had along the way, being okay with sharing that in a way that resonated with people. And I was never that way. I was always somebody who just put my head down, did the work, nothing to see here. Everything's fine, even though I was struggling through most of my career with just not feeling like I wasn't belonging, or people actively trying to hold me back. I mean, all sorts of things. So becoming comfortable with that was one big thing. And that's actually how I ended up writing a book. I mean, a lot of what's in my book is my own personal struggles. And then I, interviewed a lot of other women and realized, oh, we have a lot in common. And then on the skills side, I would say probably there's some strategy frameworks that I really use. And one of them is about sort of how to interview your stakeholders in a way to really get at the problems they may be having, and then putting together kind of like recommendations for how they overcome those problems. So that's a kind of a repeatable process for helping a business develop a strategy. And so I use that in my own work. I use that in the pro bono strategy work that I just did for Girls Inc. And then I'm actually right now mentoring 5 Black-owned businesses through the Knoxville Entrepreneurship Center, and we're kind of using that same framework. So that's what I learned.
What was the resume help website is another question.
Yeah, it's managertools.com. So I will, I'll make sure you get this sheet with my recommended resources.
Okay.
I'll just make sure you guys get that, but it's managertools.com.
All right. And I also have a question. Did you change companies because you were at a ceiling where you were at, or that type of position wasn't available? Can you give us a little detail on that?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, no, I was. I mean, there's only like one chief innovation officer at a company, and I just wasn't their choice, at my previous firm. So they had sort of picked the guy. He was young. So, I mean, a lot of my career progression had been sort of like taking over for guys that retired, So, but he was a young guy. They had sort of picked him, and so it was clear to me. The other thing too is the company had changed. The company had split. and I really wanted to do product. And so the company was no longer really doing a lot of product development work. So it was like, okay, one, I'm not going to get the role, and two, the role has changed from what I envisioned myself doing. So by switching to Oprum, it allowed me to work on product development.
Perfect. Thank you. Any other questions, anybody?
Tony, this is Lauren. I have a question.
Go ahead.
Angelique, would you speak to the game of chess it is to be a woman of color in these spaces that you've kind of had to navigate to get to where you are in your career, like the mental warfare? I'm sure you know where I'm going with this because you wrote a book about it. But can you speak to those challenges a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I can. I'm trying to figure out how to distill it down into a good answer. I mean, I think where I have gotten to finally, so I mean, I haven't been there all along the way, but finally what has served me well is really understanding what's important to me personally, and then being able to say, okay, a situation. So, okay, I mean, I'll just, talk about certain things. So, first job, technician says, I'm not taking orders from you. Put sticky notes up all over the lab. I'm not taking orders from you, Missy. Okay, I'm like 22 or whatever. So what am I going to do? And at that time, the way I handled it is probably not the way, that I would handle it now, but I internalized all of that stuff, never asked for help, just sort of put my head down and went through all of those things. And what I understand now that I'm, more mature and is that, I could have asked for help. You can ask for help inside the organization for sure. I don't think they really have helped me that much, but I didn't have any kind of support network outside of the organization either. And so I think that's something that I wish I had all throughout my career. But then there are also there were certain things that I just said, okay, no, this is not acceptable. And, that's part of the other reason why I left the other place, is because there were a couple of things that I had determined to be non-negotiables. And so it was like, well, this is just what I'm going to have to do. And I think more so than being worried about that decision, how do I want to say this? I wish I had been, in retrospect, kinder to myself for how much I agonized over it, and saying, it's okay to not be okay with these things. And it's okay whatever you choose to do about it. If you choose to stay, that's okay. If you choose to leave, that's okay. So that's what I think one of the real things I've tried to focus on in my book is about, only you can decide how to respond to those things that happen to you, and whatever you choose is okay for you, and to be kind to yourself, because you have to make these mental calculations just to get through. I don't know if that answers your question, but
absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you.